Here's a long and comprehensive account of the mammoth, a fascinating animal that bridges prehistory and the present in a unique, almost magical way, with science, legend, and mystery. The mammoth, a colossus from the Ice Age to the present day. The origin of a majestic beast. Mammoths are members of the genus Mammothus, close relatives of modern-day elephants. They appeared about 5 million years ago, evolving in Africa from primitive elephants. From there, they migrated to Eurasia and then to North America across the Bering Strait, when the continents were connected by a land bridge during the Ice Ages. The woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius, the most famous of all, lived during the Pleistocene, an era dominated by vast ice sheets. They were perfectly adapted to the cold. They had thick fur, a layer of fat up to 10 centimeters thick, small ears to retain heat, and gigantic curved tusks that could measure up to 5 meters. Their relationship with early humans. Mammoths shared the world with our ancestors. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and other archaic humans hunted mammoths for food, clothed themselves with their skins, and built shelters with their bones. There are impressive archaeological remains of villages made from mammoth bones, such as those discovered in Ukraine. Furthermore, mammoths were one of the first creatures depicted in human art. Cave paintings of mammoths are preserved in the Chauvet and Rouffignac caves, France, and Kapova, Russia, demonstrating their enormous presence in the imagination and daily life of prehistoric humans. Extinction, a farewell to the colossus. About 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the climate began to warm. The cold grasslands that sustained mammoths shrank, and many populations began to disappear. At the same time, human hunting pressure increased. The combination of climate change, habitat loss, and overhunting is believed to have been responsible for their extinction throughout most of the world. However, a small group of mammoths survived on Wrangel Island, Russia, until about 4,000 years ago, when the Egyptian pyramids already existed. The legacy, bones, myths, and DNA. Thousands of mammoth skeletons have been found frozen in the permafrost of Siberia and Alaska. Some are so well preserved that they still have internal organs, skin, eyes, and even liquid blood. This has fueled stories, scientific studies, and even legends. In ancient times, some peoples believed that mammoths were buried dragons or creatures of the underworld. In the Middle Ages in China and Russia, their tusks were traded as giant bones. Beginning in the 18th century with the birth of paleontology, the mammoth became one of the symbols of extinct life. The return of the mammoth, reality or fantasy? Currently, science is trying to revive the mammoth through genetic engineering. Using DNA extracted from frozen mammoths, scientists are seeking to insert it into the cells of Asian elephants, their closest living relatives. Projects like that of geneticist George Church and the company Colossal aim to create a mammuphant, a hybrid between a mammoth and an elephant that can live in the Arctic and help restore the tundra ecosystem, capture carbon, and combat climate change. Although it may sound like science fiction, the advancement of biotechnology has made the possibility of seeing a live mammoth in the coming decades far from impossible. The mammoth in our culture. Today, the mammoth is an icon of prehistory. It appears in books, movies, museums, and video games. It is a symbol of strength, of memory, like its relative, the elephant, and of a lost world. Its image has been used by native peoples of Siberia as a spiritual emblem, by artists as a majestic figure from ancient times, and by modern environmentalists as a symbol of extinction that must not be repeated. Even mammoth statuettes carved from ivory, more than 30,000 years old, have been found. These small objects show us that for ancient humans, the mammoth was not just prey, it was a fellow traveler in the planet's history. Although mammoths no longer walk the earth, their story lives on in our genes, in our cultural memories, and now even in our laboratories. They were titanic creatures not only in size but in significance. Perhaps one day in the frozen landscapes of the north, a furry figure will reappear, walking through the snow as it did millennia ago. And then, the mammoth will have returned, not just as a fossil but as a living part of the. Imagine a world covered in ice, where icy winds whip across endless plains and majestic creatures, larger than any modern elephant, dominate the landscape. Among them, the undisputed king, the woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius, a hairy colossus that walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years, surviving ice ages, adapting like no other, and leaving a legacy that still fascinates us today. What was its life really like? Why did it disappear? And most intriguingly, could we bring it back to life? In the warm African savannas, the first proboscideans began their evolutionary journey. They weren't the giants we know, but pig-sized creatures like the Moratherium. Over time, a changing climate and continental drift pushed their descendants northward, About 2.5 million years ago, the first true mammoth appeared, the Mammothus meridionalis, which spread across Europe and Asia. But it was the woolly mammoth, which emerged 300,000 years ago, conquered extreme cold. Its adaptations were so perfect that even today, scientists study its DNA to understand the secrets of survival in hostile climates. If we could see a live woolly mammoth, the first thing that would strike us would be its fur. It wasn't just a coat, but armor against the cold. An inner layer of fine wool and an outer layer of coarse hairs up to 90 centimeters long, impregnated with fat to repel water. Beneath its skin, a 10 centimeters layer of fat acted as thermal insulation. Its ears, much smaller than an elephant's, prevented heat loss, and its muscular, agile trunk ended in two grasping fingers, capable of tearing frozen grass or clearing snow. But without a doubt, its tusks were its most versatile tool. Spirally curved, they grew throughout its life and could measure 5 meters in males. They used them for fighting, digging for food, or even as heaters. Studies suggest that the tusks contained blood vessels that regulated their body temperature. The mammoth didn't live alone. Its home was the Mammoth Steppe, a unique ecosystem that stretched from Spain to Canada, a sea of cold hardy grasses also inhabited by woolly rhinos, steppe bison, and the fearsome cave lions. This frozen paradise was rich in nutrients thanks to the frozen soil, permafrost, which preserved organic matter. Mammoths were landscape engineers. By felling trees and scattering seeds, they kept the steppe open. But 15,000 years ago, this world began to collapse. The climate warmed, forests advanced, and the steppe fragmented. Mammoths took refuge on islands like Wrangel, where the last specimens, dwarfed by isolation, survived until just 4,000 years ago, when pyramids were already being built in Egypt. What killed the woolly mammoth? This is one of the great mysteries of paleontology. On the one hand, there's the human extermination theory. Homo sapiens who arrived in Eurasia and the Americas hunted mammoths with spears and traps. At sites like Yana Rhinoceros Horn, Siberia, bone tools have been found alongside mammoth remains. But other scientists argue that climate change was decisive. Warming reduced their habitat and altered their food. Perhaps it was a combination of both. The truth is that their disappearance changed the planet. Without mammoths, the steppe became tundra, releasing tons of carbon into the atmosphere. Today, some propose reviving the steppe by introducing bison and cloned mammoths. Mammoths never truly left us. In Siberia, ivory hunters still find perfectly preserved tusks in the permafrost, selling them for fortunes. In 2013, baby Luba, a 42,000-year-old calf, astonished the world with her state of preservation. Even her breast milk was analyzable. Today, projects like Colossal Biosciences use CRISPR to insert mammoth genes into Asian elephants, with the controversial goal of resurrecting the species. Is it ethical? Is it necessary? While the debate continues, the mammoth lives on, in our imaginations, in our museums, and perhaps soon in the tundras of the future. The woolly mammoth isn't just a fossil. It's a symbol of resilience, a reminder of how fragile life is on a changing planet. Its story teaches us about adaptation, about coexistence, and about the consequences of our own expansion. The next time you see an elephant, think of it as a distant cousin of those giants who once reigned over the ice. And who knows, maybe in a few decades you'll see them walking the earth again. And now I ask you, if you could see a woolly mammoth walking again, what would you do? Would you watch it in silence? Would you try to touch it? Or perhaps, would you ask yourself if the world is really ready for it?